omfattende programmet så det nå Peter Kim Laursen som skal holde sitt foredrag. Her vil man få både litt dansk og litt engelsk, ettersom han vil snakke på engelsk, men jeg kan se at PowerPointen jo faktisk på dansk. Jeg tror bare jeg sier litt vær så god da. Du fortsetter vel hvor de andre har sluppet i år.
Ja, det håber jeg, og måske også overlappe en lille smule. Går lyden igennem? Jeg kan aldrig finde ud af de her mikrofoner her. Først og fremmest tak for invitationen. Jeg havde fornøjelsen af at møde første gang i København, hvor jeg havde en debat med den nordkoreanske venskabsforening til Danmark. Og de har jo nogle meget markante holdninger om, hvad der sker i Nordkorea. Formanden sagde for eksempel, da han ikke har set nogen flygtningelejre, da han har rejst meget i Nordkorea, så tror han ikke, de findes. Så det er sådan lidt det interessante. Jeg tror, jeg står i engelsk, for en sikkerheds skyld. And if you have any, I'll just switch into English, which I apparently forgot when I started. My name is Peter Kim Laursen. I'm the acting director of the Institute for Strategy at the Royal Danish Defence College, and it's the correspondent to your Forsvarshögskolan, I think it's called. And I do the planning of the lecturing in military strategy, international relations, conflict management and international law for our officers before they are promoted to major or equivalent in the Navy. And I have some researchers and some majors to assist me in that regard. I have not visited North Korea except for in those blue buildings. That's on the border. And if you go to the far end of those buildings, I know at least some of you have been there, you'll be in North Korea, at least officially. But it's a bit cheating since I haven't traveled in the rest of the country. I have also been in South Korea participating as a Danish representative in the military exercises that goes on in South Korea, together with Americans, Canadians, Australians, Brits, and it's a very special experience because when the exercises go on, the Americans activate a part of the Navy, Air Force, and ground troops, but also the South Koreans activate a large part of their armed forces. So you'll meet a lot of soldiers moving around in South Korea. So it is a big exercise going on for almost 3 weeks, followed by an extra exercise by the American and the South Koreans. And of course, last year was the anniversary for the end of the Korean War. Norway did participate as well as Denmark with the medical, I think it was called Normas or something, Norwegian Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. We had a ship, Jutlandia, sailing in the waters off the coast of Korea. So it was celebrated last year, and I don't know, I think Norway might have had a visit from one of the Korean naval ships last year, as well as we had in Denmark. So the Koreans are very grateful. As you can see, I don't look like a Dane. Obviously, I was born in South Korea in Seoul, and I was adopted to Denmark when I was, I think, 5 months. So I don't speak Korean, and I don't like kimchi. I'm sorry. I like it, but I don't eat it a lot at home. So yeah. So I think it shows that I've been at least cultural changed into something else. This is my agenda. I'll talk a little bit about the regime. This comes on top of all we've heard, and I agree very much with the previous speakers. So some of it will be a bit of, I'll be repeating a bit of it, and I hope I'll add something new as well. The regime, some about the history, geography, why we have to worry, and why North Korea is doing what they are, and of course the future. And there will be no breaking news regarding the future. I think we'll see status quo, as we've heard from the previous speakers. The regime. Those items are some of the most important items when I look at it from a military perspective, of course, also a political perspective. And I've tried to compare as well as Morten did the image. I don't think I fit in, you know. It could have been quite interesting, but I changed my hairstyle. And despite the fact that I may have a bit too much on my stomach, I don't think I have this round face yet, but of course I could try. One thing we have to note is, as Morten also mentioned, as people have mentioned before, the bloodline, it runs directly from the founder of North Korea. And it's very important. It gives legitimacy, and it's something that the military officers in the top cadre don't have. So I think we have to note that as well. Of course, the party, which has moved up and down in importance, and of course the military. The financial situation of resources is also very important, comes back to the whole ideological foundation. We have to look into the state, the system, and also the society, cultural rationality, rhetoric and behavior, and of course ideology. And I'll just move ahead to ideology. We've heard about Juche and Sung, and I just want to underline independence and self-sufficiency in behavior, but also in thought. And of course, politically, they try to develop their own ideology. You can see actually now in the press reports from the KCNA, the official news agency, that they have this special ideology called Kim Il-sung-ism and Kim Jong-il-ism, with a dash between. And it is, they're trying to encapsulate the ideology which comes from Juche and Songun, as we heard before, military first. As employee in the armed forces, I can only say I support that, of course, because our budgets are shrinking. No, but it means that actually the military gets the funds they need in order to ensure the survival of the Democratic Republic of North Korea, and of course it also dimensions what resources you have left, and also what you can give to for example, food, electricity, infrastructure, social welfare, healthcare, and so on. So those two elements are very basic in North Korea. We also heard about the legacy from the occupation of North Korea, and also referring to Myers. If you read about the battles you had in North Korea, where the communists tried to liberate Korea from the Japanese occupation, instead of what they did in South Korea, where they actually worked together with the occupying force. They tried to earn money, they went into government, they went into politics, they built up huge industrial complexes, as you see today, Hyundai, Samsung, which in some part are left over from companies that had been established during the Japanese occupation. And that makes two different stories. One in the north, where the regime is a continuation of the struggle against the Japanese occupation power, and in the south, where it's a continuation of the cooperation with the occupation power. And that is probably why that some people in the south, not many, but some people in the south think that the North Korean regime might be the real thing, so to say. You're not allowed to say it, of course, but some people do actually think that. The Cold War, the Second World War came, and the Soviet and the Americans decided to split the peninsula. Nobody asked what people wanted on the Korean peninsula. The great powers agreed that the peninsula should be reunified, but nobody could agree on how, or under what government, or what type of government. So we draw this line on the 38th parallel, as you all know, which split the country in two. The problem was, and I'll try just to elaborate on what was said before, that, and this is the quote from the former Secretary of State, that he said actually that the American defensive perimeter runs along the red lines. And as you very elegantly said, it left Korea without the American sphere of interest. And it actually gave a free hand to North Korea in order to say, well, if the Chinese say yes, and if the Russians, the Soviets at that time say yes, we can invade, because the Americans won't resist it. A bit like when you read about the history of the first Kuwait War, where the Iraqis occupied Kuwait, an ambassador also hinted in a way that we might not, care if you actually occupy Kuwait. And then when they did it, the Americans went to war. So it's something about reading history, but also reading the signals, interpreting the signals you get. The American withdrawal from the peninsula, as well as the Soviet withdrawal, didn't make it easier, because pulling American troops out also showed that, well, there's no great interest in the area, so we could do that. We can invade the southern part without any problem. And of course, we had the war, and I'll just run through it very quickly. The Korean forces, South Korean forces, being pushed back to what we call the Pusan perimeter. It wasn't an organized force. The South Korean military wasn't organized. It wasn't coherent. The units fell apart when they met when the North Koreans attacked, and they had to withdraw here down to this perimeter. The Americans had, as I mentioned, left the peninsula, so they had to bring in reinforcements from Japan and other places, and it took time. And that's why the right communist forces, the North forces, could move that far south. MacArthur made a brilliant, looking into military operations. If you want to read into amphibious warfare, you should read about the Incheon landing. Shallow area, you have to sail in with the tide. You have to be aware of rocks and so on. But he made a brilliant landing behind the North Korean forces, and they had to withdraw north and of course you had reinforcements coming in from Japan. It's the pointer here. There's Jim. Bringing in reinforcements from Japan and being able to push the North Korean forces to the Yalu River. And of course it was a huge mistake. You can say that the MacArthur didn't really have the ability to read politics, because he continued to use the Yalu River despite Chinese objections, and also explicit where they said, do not get near the Chinese border, we have to react that. So a huge mistake that actually, you can say, led to the continuation of the war. Had the American forces stopped somewhere, in a line here, you might not have seen a Chinese intervention, and you might have seen a whole other story today. Of course, the Chinese volunteers moving over the border and pushing the forces southbound, and you have this armistice line as we see it today. Just to briefly run through the armistice, it is an armistice, it's not a peace, as mentioned before. We have this military demarcation line, and it is the line running across the peninsula. We have a demilitarized zone, where you are only allowed to have a certain number of people within. It's 2 kilometers to the north and 2 kilometers to the south. They would cease any hostile act, hence they would stop the fighting. They had to withdraw from this demilitarized zone, and they were not allowed to bring in new enforcements to the peninsula. Being American, you would like to put in new equipment, to pull out your old equipment. You would like to replace soldiers that have been living in Korea perhaps for 4 years. Is that bringing in new military enforcements? Americans would say, no, of course it's not. We're keeping the same troop level, we're keeping the same equipment level. But if I were a North Korean, I would say, you're bringing in new military reinforcements. You are actually breaking what we call the AA. And of course, it depends on how you interpret the text, but the North Korean can actually say, you are violating the AA. The Americans, or the foreign forces in North and South, are allowed to be up to 35. According to the recent numbers from the IISS, the Americans have approximately 28,000 soldiers. And this is what I mentioned, you're allowed to have 1,000 persons in the DMZ to the north and to the south. In some villages, we also allowed to have soldiers as well. And of course, this point was a very interesting point. You had to exchange prisoners. And there was a huge debate on whether North Korean prisoners should be forced back to North Korea, or if they should choose to go voluntarily. And they opted for the last option. But it created a lot of stir because, of course, the North Korean wanted their soldiers back. And, of course, exchange of civilians. This is the signing, as correctly mentioned, the Chinese delegate is signing for the northern side, and the American delegate is signing for the southern side. So North Korean signature, and the North Korean didn't sign it until later at a different place. So it's a kind of a strange ceremony. But here you have the original agreement. This was the change, just to underline it. You can see the 30th parallel, and actually this is what changed hands. A small strip of land, but it took 3 years, and it costed around approximately 3.4 million dead or wounded. Not talking about civilian being forced to move when the front is moving north and south. Again, a map that is widely used. You can see here's the small island of Rochelle Waipido. As Morten mentioned, there's no disagreement about the border to the east. They agree that it should go in a straight line following the parallel. But here you have this unilaterally UN command / US drawn line. And this is, of course, the North Korean. They accept the sovereignty over these islands, the South Korean sovereignty. But the problem is, if you take the UNCLOS, you can also talk about, are you allowed to have territory, sea territory around your islands? And it can be, you can come into a huge judicial fight over that. Of course, we are fighting at the moment over the North Pole with the Russians and the Norwegians and the Americans as well. But it is, of course, why there are so many problems there. One of the things that the South Koreans do from time to time, they are firing artillery, artillery exercises. If some of you have been into the military, you do exercise in order to, you keep your equipment in tip-top shape, and you do to have routines on your spine and so on. If I was, say, North Korean, and you had a South Korean artillery battery firing this way, I would say, well, you're firing into our waters. That could be interpreted as an act of war. You are actually attacking us right now. So, when you are attacking us, we are allowed to fire back. South Korea would say, no, we are firing within our own waters. And again, depending how you interpret the maps, the situation, the intent, it could lead to first of all, an escalation, but also to of course, problems with, what do you say, to drawing the line when you have to at some point fix the border between the two lines. And of course, you had the shelling here, and you had I think the Cheonan was over here somewhere. I had to just ask someone. I think it was over here, but around those islands. So that's the problem, that firing into these waters from a military perspective, you would say, well, I'm just firing within my own waters. Vis-a-vis North Korea saying, well, you're actually attacking our territory. If you're going into geography, and I'll also cover that a bit, which we've done before, you see the situation here. But there are so many conflicts between the parties in this region. You have the northern part of Japan discussing with Russia what to do with the territory that was occupied by the Soviet Union. You have the dispute here, Dokdo, actually just outside the Japanese embassy in Seoul. There's a big poster saying the Dokdo Island are ours. So you are provoking the Japanese all the time when you have the possibility to do it. You have the discussion of further islands down here. You have Taiwan, of course, the South China Sea. And just recently, the Chinese decided to expand their air identification zone, where you have to identify yourself if you're flying into the territory and so on. And South Korea did the same. They decided to expand their zone as well. And of course, it's not something that on the face creates military confrontation, but that is a problem, because this is just one side of the tensions building up between the states over there. And I'm not suggesting there'll be a war soon, but I'm suggesting there are potential for conflict. And also, you've seen the naval vessels from both China and Japan meeting pretty close in some of the areas over there. Yes. If we compare the latest military figures from the military balance this year, you can see in the region we have 6 of the 10 most powerful military states in the region. This is the standing armed force, and it goes from China's 2.3, have a DPRK, pretty well equipped with the personnel number, and down to Japan's 230,000. I think, I'm not quite sure, but I think most of the Japanese self-defense force consists of officers. Well-trained officers, so in order for Japan to build a pretty powerful armed force, they would have to enroll privates to conscript people into the armed forces, and they could create a pretty big standing force within a few years. To take the nuclear capacity, we all know that China, US, and Russia have nuclear weapons. We know that Japan has the capacity to build nuclear weapons because they have the whole fuel cycle. They have uranium, they have enrichment capacity, they have the ability to separate plutonium and so on to use in their power plant. So the capacity is not far away, or the nuclear weapon is not far away. South Korea could have the capacity, but the United States have said you are not allowed to enrich uranium. So that means, as well as we've talked about operational control with armed forces, the United States is trying to control South Korea's ability to actually build nuclear weapons at some point, and that it could be as well a way to try to stop South Korea from going ballistic, so to say. Long-range missiles, South Korea is trying to build their own rocket. It's not going that well. They're using Russian technology, and I think the 2 first rockets blew up, and they've now had a successful launch. You can see artillery. We've been talking about that according to the numbers, and that's why I put the asterisks here. There are very huge possible mistakes in these numbers because we cannot go around and count all the new artillery pieces in North Korea. But some people estimate they have around 44,000 artillery tubes.
That's EMP.
Sorry, 21. Sorry, thank you very much. And people estimate that around, I think, 50% of the military force on the ground is within the southern part of the border to South Korea. Let's say they have 10,000 artillery tubes standing in the Kaesong Heights. And the Kaesong Heights is the area just north of the DMZ in North Korea. If they fire one time, that would mean, let's say, estimate 8,000 shells flying southbound. Not all their artillery can reach Seoul, and not all their artillery can reach the southern part of Seoul, because they have a limited range. Some of the guns they have, some of it is old, some of it is not very precise, some of it may be malfunctioning, and so on. But they might be able to throw something like 5,000 grenades southbound, not counting their missiles, because they have a huge missile program which we'll get back to. As mentioned before, it could create a lot of damage, and of course it is a deterrent to any armed action from the south. And just to take the last point here with the financial difference, you can see also an estimate, the BNP, GDP, and the GDP per capita that's a huge difference as well. Yes. If you look into the equipment, and none of this is classified, so I can say what I want, and I don't represent the Danish government. This fighter aircraft is a MiG-21. It's designed back in the 50s and went into service in the 60s. And North Korea, some years ago, bought used MiG-21 from, I think, Kazakhstan. If you see the pilots, their helmets are a bit like those you see here, made of cloth. In Denmark, we use helmets made of carbon, a big difference. And also, if you drive a tank, as you can see behind here, in Denmark you would have a hard helmet. Here it's still cloth. Some people have estimated that this, one of these missiles, when they took a closer look at it, wasn't a real missile, because some of the weldings wasn't made that perfect, so its shape didn't match and so on. This is 100% surely a Chinese-made transporter. And if it came into North Korea in the recent years, which people think it did, it's a violation of the UN sanctions, because it's a piece of military equipment. But it is a Chinese design compared to the ones China used. It's similar. Some of the ships, you can see one here, has been involved in some of the sea battles we've heard before. Old equipment as well. They haven't built any new ships in the recent years. The one thing that people fear is what you see here, the midget submarine, the small submarines. Some people estimate they have around 70 submarines. And what can cause trouble in the event of a crisis is if you cut the link, the sea link, between Japan and South Korea. Because you need to bring in reinforcement by sea. You can't fly everything into South Korea. And if you have a lot of submarines, of course, you can create a lot of damage. And that's, of course, why many Western observers look into how the submarine capacity is being built in North Korea. They do have new MiG-29 fighter aircraft. Actually, this fighter aircraft used to be state-of-the-art. Some people said that it was able to match some of our modern fighter aircraft, like the F-15, F-16. F-16 you have in Norway as well. So they do have modern equipment. The problem is, speaking about China, they have no training. They haven't tried using it for real. They don't know how to work together between the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy, what we call joint. They haven't been in real operations, and that's of course a weakness with the North Korean armed forces. The only thing they have plenty of is soldiers. They have around 1 million in the army, and that's quite a lot. But we don't know much about the loyalty. We don't know much about how well they are being fed. We know that a lot of food goes to the military, but the number itself is, for some people, frightening. But the quality is another question, which we could put a big question mark here. And I would do the same coming from the military. I've tried to sketch the situation over there, also using some of the lectures we had before. And there is an joint interest here between those three states. And there is a joint interest here between those three states. The problem is that all the relationships are somewhat disturbed by conflict. Territorial conflict, economic, and so on. So it makes the situation very, very complex. You should be able to say, well, Japan and South Korea could be able to work together, two huge economies, interest in trying to stop North Korea developing their nuclear weapon. But then you have this history coming in, you have the comfort women as mentioned before, you have the territorial disputes, you have the talk about, did the Japanese Prime Minister give an excuse, or said, I'm sorry, or did he just give an excuse, and so on. The current Prime Minister talking about retracting that excuse or whatever it was. So just to show that it is a conflict, an area with a lot of conflicts in, and some of them we don't see right now. Some of them are lying just below the surface, at good surface at any time, and it would complicate the situation even further. So, but why is this worrying? Looking from a military perspective, you could say nuclear weapons are worrying. The problem is that we don't know if North Korea has a functioning nuclear weapon. The argument for building a nuclear capacity, you could say, as Morten also mentioned, was MacArthur's request to the President of the United States asking for authorization to use nuclear weapons against, for instance, China, but perhaps also against North Korea. That was a legacy that goes on today, and it's saying, well, we could be attacked by nuclear weapons, well, we should have a deterrent capacity in order to avoid that. The program was started by assistance from the Soviet Union and China, and then they went stolen. And the interesting part is that they are actually very good in North Korea. Looking at some of the technical progress they've made, together with the fact that they have been under UN sanctions for quite a long time, makes it quite impressive that they've been able to circumvent the sanctions, but also to move ahead with the systems. And of course, it has helped a bit that they've been using A.Q. Khan from Pakistan, who's been willing to sell nuclear secrets to almost everyone. And that's, of course, another problem which we can go into discussion about with North Korea, if they really want to push the limit, so to say, and would be willing to sell their nuclear technology to a third party. It is rational for North Korea to build this program. If you want to survive as a small state, and you don't have the money to build a modern armed force with modern aircraft, modern ships, and modern tanks and artillery, a nuclear weapon could be the deterrent you need. And if you have the time, if you have the patience, if you have the technological knowledge, and if you have the contacts, you could do it. And of course, North Korea has probably gone quite a way here. As I mentioned here, is the deterrent of the poor country. And it works. You can see here, as mentioned before, taking the lessons learned or experience gained from Iraq, Libya, and Iran, and also Israel, another good example. It shows that if you have a nuclear deterrent, you could actually live for quite some time without being attacked. And of course, this is the great concern. Would you be willing to trade the secrets you have to a third party? I'm not inclined to think that North Korea would be interested in that, because it would only mean more punishment for them, and they have what they need right now. One thing that could force them to do it, if they really need the money. But as I saw a statistic yesterday that North Korea had probably been selling weapons for, was it 11 billion last year? I'm not quite sure the number. But they are still earning money on selling weapons, despite the fact that they are under UN sanctions. This is a new satellite picture, actually, just taken from the International Space Station, and it hasn't changed. You can see there's still Pyongyang and a small dots around the country, but nothing more. And this was, of course, also a part of their PR strategy. I haven't found a better picture, but if you look closer into this map, it's actually lines coming from North Korea to the American continent, or to USA. And one of the nuclear warheads is set to detonate in Texas. And actually, this shows that they wanted to target Bush, because some people estimated that it was supposed to hit in this city of Crawford, where former President George W. Bush has his ranch. So it is, of course, a signal. They also hit somewhere else in I think it was in Virginia, where US have a big naval base with the nuclear submarines and carriers and so on. So of course, they know what they're doing, and sometimes at least with their propaganda. I'm not that worried about the nuclear capacity of North Korea, because in order to get a nuclear weapon, you need to go through a few phases. You need to have the technique. You need to be able to build a warhead, actually. You need to make this efficient technique in order to start the chain reaction. They may be able to do that. The first one people said was a fizzle. It didn't work. And if it really worked, they had managed to do something in a very short time that nobody else had managed to do in that shorter time, to make a small warhead with a very small yield, the effect, because the Americans had used a long time to do that. The second test was probably more successful, and people do believe that the third test was a full success. So they've probably gone, from bullet 1 to bullet 2. The next thing, you have to make it small. You don't want a nuclear weapon that fits into a container, 40 feet container. You want it small so you can deliver it from A to B. So you need what we call miniaturization. This is a cone warhead. You need a certain number. If you have one nuclear warhead and you use it, then you don't have anything else. You used all your capacity, so to say. So you want to build a number of warheads. And the best thing would be to have what you call a second strike capability. It means if you fire one nuclear warhead, you know you'll probably be hit by a nuclear warhead back, but you need to be able to fire again. So you need this second strike capability. Then when you build the warhead, you need it to be robust. So when it fires here, it goes into the atmosphere and it has to go back into the atmosphere all the way down to the Earth. Then you have to be able to deliver it. You have to put it on a missile. You have to put it on an aircraft, submarine, a ship. But in order to do that, it goes back here. You have to make it small, and you have to make it robust, because in a missile, things really shake. I haven't tried it, but it really shakes. And then you have to have precision. It doesn't help that you shoot your missile towards Seattle and it ends up in somewhere else in the ocean. And that's also something that's probably very difficult for especially seeing the track record with the missiles in North Korea. So that makes me less worried about the North Korean nuclear weapons program. But we still have to worry about the nuclear capacity they have. Also safeguards, is it a safe nuclear weapon, nuclear reactor they have? But also, as I mentioned before, are they willing to sell the secrets? Is it possible to ignore? I don't think so. But we may have some red lines, and I've written a small piece in Ræson in Denmark saying, actually inspired by Morten, we could say no more nukes. We accept the nuclear program you have today. We accept status quo, but no more nukes. The next thing, we don't want you to develop the program. If I just go back to, are some of you within the physics, been working with physics? Yes. Okay, then you probably, one of them is made of plutonium, and it's made from the fuel rods that they took out of the Yongbyon. The other one could have been made on uranium, where they use those centrifuges. We hear about them in Iran, where they try to separate some kind of uranium from another kind. I'm not a chemist. That's the problem. No better nukes, because if you have the possibility to make nukes both ways, it makes it more difficult for us to control what they're doing. So one fuel cycle here, enrichment, this one, the Yongbyon, where they took plutonium out, we knew that, because they removed the fuel rods as we heard before. This was a new one, and I think Morten mentioned also the quote from Seifert, who's been visiting this area. Of course, they know that he's reporting back to the US. If they do this as well, using uranium, they have a second road, and it makes it, as I mentioned, more difficult for us. So no better. And the third one, as I mentioned, you're not allowed to spread your nuclear technology to a third party. That be a state, a terrorist organization, criminal organization, NGO, and so on. So that's the 3 no's that we have to at least to make sure that North Korea sticks to. And then China. It's very easy for us to say, well, China will never be attacked by nuclear weapons. Hopefully not. But they have 3 red lines as well. They said no nuclear weapons. It could be unacceptable for them for the reasons we heard before, because it pulls the Americans closer. It might start a nuclear race. South Korea wants nuclear weapons. Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, Australia, and so on. Not likely, but possible. No nuclear weapons. Next one, no instability. Well, do we have instability? We have some instability, because the American forces are close. You had naval clashes in the sea west of the Korean Peninsula. So we might have instability. But the last one, no, there's no war. And I think that's the real red line. There was an interview with the Chinese foreign minister where he said, the Korean Peninsula is where it is. We have a red line. We'll not allow war or instability on the Korean Peninsula. Again, how do we define instability? Is instability the situation we see now, so they want to improve the situation? Or is instability that we are trying to shake the regime in North Korea, saying more sanctions? more pressure on the regime with the consequences it may have. Then another thing we talk about all the time, especially the intelligence services, is the missiles, and they haven't successfully tested a missile, that can reach all the way to United States. They can probably hit Guam if they want to, but I agree they won't attack United States. It would be suicide. But they have the missiles, and also they can proliferate the missiles. They can sell technology to third countries. We know they've done it to Syria, to Yemen, to Sudan, Pakistan. A lot of places they are selling missile technology. And the problem is that while the missile technology may not be used against Japan, South Korea, United States, it is being used other places. We saw Scud missiles being fired in the civil war in Syria, and it creates a problem for us that we allow the proliferation of missile technology to states that are actually willing to use the missiles. And they are testing it. This is from the news. You can see the dates. The 3rd, the 27th of February, and you have the 4th here, where they're firing first of all missiles, but also their new guns they develop, artillery projectiles. So they are testing them, and of course they are testing us as well. What I just want to mention is the capacities we haven't talked much about. First of all is the Special Operation Forces. This is a midget submarine that went on ground near the coast. Some of them tried, at least I remember, to kill themselves, but they captured some of them. And this is a low speedboat being able to come close to land without being noticed on the radar. This is something the United States considers a big threat, because these forces would be able to destroy infrastructure, to create havoc in South Korea if they wanted to. And another point is cyber security or cyber warfare. The Americans also say that, it's probably true, the North Korean attacked South Korean banks and news sites, closing them down. It is, of course, to show us that North Korea has the capacity, but it wasn't to damage South Korea, because if they wanted to damage South Korea, if I was North Korean, I wouldn't have gone after banks. I would have gone after transportation system, trying to make the trains go crazy in the underground and so. I would have gone after hospitals, closing them down, forcing the emergency generators to turn on, and perhaps killing people. I would try to stop the water supply and so on. So you could, if you wanted to, create a lot of damage with the cyber capacity. And they have shown that they are capable of doing it, and probably also willing to do it. And of course, I won't spend much time here. We have the naval battles here. This is actually one South Korean ship trying to ram a North Korean boat. We had the 3 naval battles. We had the shelling, and you can see 170 shells going from North Korea towards the south, and only 80 shells going the other way. It could have gone very bad if they had decided to go all in, as mentioned before. They did hit what they wanted to hit, and the killing of the civilians was an accident. People say that civilians had moved into a former government property, a bit like the explanation we got when the Americans hit the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. They probably are aware of what they're hitting on the islands. They are very good at collecting intelligence, and they did apologize for killing the 2 civilians in Waipido. And I have to say, this is mostly historical, because we haven't seen terrorist acts from North Korea in some years, actually, I think since the late 80s. The attack at the Blue House, the attack in Burma, and the KL flight, the downing of one of the Korean Airlines flights before the Olympics in '88, trying to send a warning to the world of not participating in the Olympic Games. Abductions. We had an abduction actually in Denmark, in Copenhagen in '83. I think the year is right, isn't it? There was a Japanese girl being abducted from Copenhagen, and actually this is a picture of some of the actions going on. And also illegal drugs, cigarettes, liquor, phony currency and weapons. And actually there was a case in Copenhagen in '76 where some of the embassy staff had been discovered in trying to I think it was cigarettes actually, and afterwards the North Koreans closed the embassy in Copenhagen.
In Oslo.
Oh, and in Oslo. Oh, yeah. So Sweden is all that's left in the Nordic countries. So why? Well, I agree with some of the previous speakers. Survival and security. They are following the same procedure as China has done it, as Russia has done it. They want to be left alone. No interference in domestic internal matters. Like the UN Charter says, they want to develop their own politics, their own economy. They want to be not left alone, but they will cooperate, they will trade and so on, but they want to be left alone within these matters, politics, economy, domestic affairs. They are willing to go into negotiations, we've heard it before, and they are willing. They want a normalization, especially with the United States, they want peace, and of course they want to remove all the sanctions, because that would enable them to trade and also to earn a revenue to be used domestically in the military or on the population. But the problem is that everybody comes to the table with, demands. It's something for something, quid pro quo. The Americans say you have to stop the nuclear program and roll it back before we'll negotiate. The North Koreans says we want to negotiate, and after that we can talk about issues, perhaps also the nuclear program. But we want to negotiate first. For us, it's seen as North Korea continuously tries to push the bar just a bit more. Can they shoot across the DMZ? Yeah, that's okay. Can they attack a naval ship in the ocean? Yeah, okay. Can they attack a South Korean island? That's okay. I'm seeing from the South Korean government and the American government, at least some of the officials, they are pushing the bar, but we can't do anything. But how do we stop them? Nobody's talking about an all-out invasion of North Korea because it would be impossible. But they are being allowed, some people, especially the conservatives say, being allowed to push the bar upwards, bit by bit by bit. And of course, mentioned before, no trust. There's no trust between the parties. Everybody's been breaking agreements over the years. The Americans, North Koreans, and so on. And of course, point of no return. We probably moved beyond our ability to try to roll back the nuclear program, at least in the short side. We may be able to do it in the longer side, but I don't think it's any up for discussion right now, because if they give it up, what do they have? If North Korea didn't have its nuclear program, it would be quite as interesting as, and I'm sorry to say that, Albania. Nobody is interested in Albania except unless something happens. But North Korea, you could put it a bit bluntly, saying North Korea wouldn't be interesting if they didn't have the nuclear program. And I know we have the discussion about human rights, and it's a very important matter. But looking at it from a military perspective, it wouldn't be that interesting without the nuclear program. And I know it's a bit provocative said, but and I don't really mean it, but just trying to put an edge on it. So, what is rational behavior? Well, we would say, looking from our perspective, that rational behavior is what we are doing. But I agree also with Morten saying, well, we have to try to turn around and say, how does this look from the North Korean side? And I can see, if I was a North Korean, I can see it is very provocative when you deploy two huge B-2 bombers flying over Seoul. I can see it's provocative when you send a huge ship-based radar to South Korea. I can see it's provocative when you send a aircraft carrier to Busan, and also when you send nuclear submarines. I would be provoked as well, and with the history of the U.S. history of war fighting, I wouldn't be perhaps worried that much, but I would at least raise my eyebrows. So again, rational behavior. Well, you can push the bar, and it gives us the advantages we want. So it's what we do. And as I said, nothing to do. We just had the discussion over lunch. Do we really want to push the sanction button? Fuel for cars, so you won't be able to do military maneuvers. Gasoline, diesel, we would say no more export. International bank transfers. The average citizen in North Korea, in my opinion, doesn't regularly use international bank transfers. You could stop that, and you could stop luxury goods. Already now in the UN sanctions, you are not allowed to export sport cars, speedboats, gems, gold, and things like that, and other luxury goods as well. But you can close it all down. The problem is that if you saw the fuel, you could see whole new Mercedes cars, Geländewagen, Volkswagen flying around in the parade. Where did they come from? They probably came from China. So the sanctions right now, they are being enforced from some countries, but not by all. And then, of course, the recent developments. I just want to highlight this quote. It's from Duty, the former Secretary of Defense's memoirs, and he said, after this Xiaonan and after the YPG, South Korea's original plans for retaliation were, we thought, disproportionately aggressive, involving both aircraft and artillery. We were worried the exchanges would escalate dangerously. Just your point exactly. Because the former president, as well as the current president, has said, we will respond artillery fire, with aircraft, and that would mean escalating the crisis, because we haven't seen South Korean aircraft being used against North Korea since the war. So it would create a whole new ball game, and it could create some consequences we can't see. So no goes, no collapse, no escalation, and no harsh overreaction, no offensive operations. The problem is, and we've all been underlining it, what about misinterpretations? What about a bold general in the South Korean army after they received operational control saying, no more, give them everything we've got? And of course, mistakes can always happen. The problem is, if you don't have the regular contact between North and South Korea, which you cut off from time to time, mistakes cannot be stopped before they develop. And I think those three are the most dangerous developments you could see on the Korean Peninsula. Also having in mind the transfer of operational control and so on. So that was the point. And of course, as you all said, in the short run, status quo. We might see some changes, and we've seen it before. This is the Olympic team, the joint Olympic team, when they did that. Status quo, but also the possibility for changes, and in the long run, nobody can say, because we haven't had the possibility to look into the North Korean regime as much as we would like to. I think that covers it. Any?
For dette foredraget hvor den koreanske halvøya ble sett fra et militært perspektiv. Her var det mye å lære, og jeg er sikker på det er mange som også har spørsmål til dette. Og her har vi også noen minutter til å snakke om det, før vi skal ha pause. Tror jeg riktig når det er kvart over, at det er halv som Geir skal starte? Ja, jeg tror nesten det. Vi kan tenke på noe tid, jeg går ut for at du også vil styre dette.
Ja, men det...
Ja, vær så god.
Over ett.
Nå, så skynder vi os.
Hvordan?
Ja, I bestemmer.
Eller nordisk?
Ja, I bestemmer.
Jeg har et spørsmål om informasjonsinnsamling og hva man vet om hverandre. Sør-Korea er et av verdens mest avanserte teknologiske samfunn, og Nord-Korea heller er i den andre enden. Må det være en enorm forskjell i hva de vet om hverandre, og hva de kan overvåke hos hverandre.
Altså, i Sydkorea bruger man jo alle former for sensorer, altså alt, hvad man kan indsamle oplysninger. Det er human intelligence, det er SIGINT, signal intelligence, så det vil sige, at man lytter med på alt, hvad man kan. Problemet bliver, og det er der, hvor du får den bedste efterretning, og det er Morten ekspert i, for han er efterretningsforsker, det er jo at få indsigt, altså personlig indsigt i inderkredsen i Nordkorea. Altså det optimale ville jo være at have en højtstående agent, som sad som næstkommanderende i den nordkoreanske hær, eller som sad som personlig assistent for Kim Jong-un. Problemet er, at det vi har set, det er jo, at man ofte skifter ud på pladserne for at sikre, at der ikke opstår de her magtkonstellationer. Det er ikke sådan, at man henretter, og det er jeg fuldstændig enig i, man henretter ikke alle, der forsvinder fra rampelyset. Men man har jo tendens til at skifte folk ud, alt efter hvem der er loyale, og hvem man gerne vil have ind omkring sig. Og det betyder, at du aldrig får mulighed for at opbygge et imperium omkring dig. De små kejserdømmer, som vi nogle gange ser, når folk sidder for lang tid. Og jeg tror, det er vores største udfordring i forhold til at vide, hvad der sker i Nordkorea. Det er vores manglende evne til at få indblik i regimet indefra. Og det ville jo være den lykkelige situation, at vi kunne få, kan man sige, informationer ud fra det nordkoreanske regimes inderste tanker, som amerikanerne åbenbart er gode til at få ud om. Især Angela Merkel, ikke? Men i hvert fald at komme ind i anatomien, ikke? Fordi vi kan sagtens se deres manøvrer. Altså vi kan sagtens se, hvor de kører hen med deres missil-affyringsramper eller missil-launchers. Og vi kan også se, hvor deres fly står. Og vi kan også se, hvor mange kampvogne de har, når de står i det åbne. Men vi kender ikke nok til, fra mit perspektiv, til deres inderste tankegang og den den indre logik, som de anvender for at gøre, som de gør. Og det tror jeg også, det medfører, at vi nogle gange overser perspektivet, hvorfor gør Nordkorea sådan her? Altså når vi skal sætte os i deres sted. Fordi så tager vi vores vestlige tankegang og siger, i den her situation vil jeg gøre det her, men det er med vores tankegang. Ikke? Og der tror jeg, at vi begår en stor fejl, som gør, at vi ikke rigtig kan forstå Nordkorea på en ordentlig måde. Så jeg tror, konklusionen er manglende indsigt, selvom vi gerne vil samle signaler ind, så tror jeg bare ikke, at vi har mulighed for det, som vi gerne vil. Men det kan være, at Morten ved mere om lige præcis efterretningsdelen.
Jamen, jeg er meget enig i det, du siger. Altså, Human har vi rigtig dårlige forudsætninger for, at de årsager, du nævnte. Og SIGINT, altså den teknologiske overvågning, er vi rigtig dygtige til. Vi har satellitovervågning, og vi har de der overvågningsfly, som man sender ind over. Amerikanerne har jo den her Dragon Lady, kalder de den, som flyver i sådan nogle 3-turnusskift ind over Nordkorea og observerer troppebevægelser, så man i forbindelse med Waipido, artilleriangrebet. Sydkoreanske militær var ikke hurtigt nok til at reagere, men de så, der var noget på vej. Så alt på taktisk niveau, det forstår vi nogenlunde. Alt på strategisk tænkningsniveau, det forstår vi ikke særlig godt.
Er der andre, der har noget? Ja.
Hvis det bryter ut krig, så er det ganske klart at Nordkorea kommer til at tape. Hvor længe kommer de til at holde, og hvad kommer til at være taktikken deres? Kommer de til at prøve at skade Sydkorea mest muligt med den tiden de har, eller?
Et rigtig godt spørgsmål. Du nævnte 5 dage, kan det passe? Jeg vil, hvis regimet tror, de kan noget, altså det vil sige, at Kina vil komme til hjælp på et tidspunkt, hvilket de selv tvivler på, altså nordkoreanerne selv tvivler på, så tror jeg, at de vil holde måske op til 2 uger. Udfordringen for Nordkorea bliver, om de kan holde sammen. Fordi hvis jeg var nordkoreansk general, og der kom en krig, det tror jeg ikke, der gør, men der kom en krig, så ville jeg forsøge at overleve i det her spil. Og det kunne være, at jeg lavede en udbryderfraktion, der hedder, hvis jeg sad et sted i Nordkorea, ville jeg lave et område, som jeg beherskede. Ikke? Og så ville det så kunne fragmentere Nordkorea, og så ville de ikke holde så lang tid. Men problemet er, og det var det, jeg nævnte i forhold til den kvaliteten af de nordkoreanske styrker, hvis de er så loyale, som de siger, de er, altså hvor alle vil dø for Kim Jong-un og for forsvaret af Nordkorea, ligesom jo danske soldater vil dø for forsvaret af Danmark osv., så står man med en stor opgave, for så er det ikke noget, der bare lige klares på et øjeblik. Jeg tror, hvis man håber på, at det ramler sammen, hvis der kommer en krig. Igen, jeg tror ikke, der gør det. Konsekvenserne kan være enormt store, fordi hvis du er i en overlevelseskamp, hvor du ved, du bliver besejret, så har du 2 muligheder. Du kan ligge dig ned fladt og overgive dig med det samme og undgå ødelæggelser. Du kan også sige, hvis jeg skal gå ned, så lad mig gå ned i flammer. Og det vil sige, det var jo det, man frygtede med Saddam Hussein, at han havde brugt kemiske våben før, og måske ville han bruge det igen, osv. Og det er jo det, man måske frygter i forhold til Nordkorea, hvis ledelsen og den militære ledelse, som ved, at de er skyldige, i hvert fald nogle af dem er muligvis i nogle menneskerettighedsforbrydelser, så har de ikke noget at se frem til ud af et fængsel. Og så kan rationalet være, så kan vi lige så godt gå ned, og så fyrer vi det af, vi kan mod Sydkorea, mod Japan, ikke? Og så bliver der problemer, fordi de kan jo også ramme Japan, altså de kan ramme Japan med deres missiler. Og derfor er Japan, såvel som Sydkorea, i gang med at forstærke deres ballistiske missilforsvar. Jeg fik lige en nyhedsmail i går om, at Sydkorea lige har meddelt, at de er ved at opdatere deres Patriot-missilbatteri, det vi kender fra ørkenkrigen og amerikanerne. Så på den måde, så tror jeg, at nordkoreanerne har valget, hvis de kommer i en krig, enten at overgive sig, de kan også trække det ud, eller også så går de overlevet. Men jeg håber ikke det sidste, og det tror jeg heller ikke, at, jeg tror ikke, vi kommer dertil 7-13. Yes.
Jeg tenkte jeg skulle spørre om forholdet mellom de ulike avskrekkingene som Nordkorea har for sin sikkerhet. Og det ene er altså dette at de har store mengder artilleri som de kan skyte over og mot solområdet. Og det andre er at de har utviklet noen rudimentære atomvåpen. Hvis Nordkoreas ledelse ønsker å tenke langsiktig, så virker det for meg som det ville være en fornuftig strategi å sørge for at resten av verden godtar at Nord-Korea har atomvåpen, altså ikke formelt godtar, men at de regner med at Nord-Korea har kapasitet for angrep med atomvåpen. Og så snart det er blitt anerkjent, eller ikke anerkjent åpent, men på en måte forstått internasjonalt, så kan du skjære ned på troppene fra de over 1 million som du har nå, og sette dem inn i siviløkonomien. Og du kan kutte ned på de konvensjonelle våpnene, og så stole på avskrekning av atomvåpen. Da vil du kunne klare å få gang i økonomien. Men hvilke utsikter er det til at dette kan skje? Kan man spare vesentlig penger samtidig som man har atomavskrekning?
For at få den troværdige atomafskrækkelse, så skal du teste et våben, der virker. Og det vil sige, reelt set, så vil Pyongyang skulle lave paddehattesky over jorden. Så man kan se, at vi har et atomvåben, der virker. Det er den ene ting. Og de vil skulle lave en succesfuld missilaffyring, der flyver principielt fra Nordkorea, og lige så langt ud i vandet, som USA ligger væk. Og de skal kunne ramme det mål, de siger, de vil. Først der begynder du at have en troværdig afskrækkelsesmekanisme. Derefter skal du så selvfølgelig bygge programmet op og have nok af dem, altså kvantitativt nok af dem, og du skal have en procedure for at kunne anvende dem. Jeg snakkede med en raketforsker fra DTU i København, og han sagde, det nordkoreanerne mangler, det er know-how i procedurer. Altså det amerikanerne og Sovjetunionen bygget op med, hvis der var det røde lys, skulle alle mand ned i atombunkerne og være klar til at trykke på knapperne på atommissilerne. Så der er en lang række hen imod, at de har den troværdige atomkapacitet. Det er den ene ting. Du kan principielt godt spare på dit militære budget, hvis du får atomvåbenkapaciteten, i mit perspektiv. Men jeg vil stadigvæk mene, at jeg tror ikke, det er realistisk for Nordkorea. For det første skal du finde noget til folk, der er lave. Og det er jeg lidt tvivl om, hvor de skal ind, og det er måske der, hvor man kan sige, at åbningen af markedsøkonomi bliver relevant. Så jeg tror, i første omgang, så vil man ikke skære ned. Derudover, så kan du ikke, tror jeg, bygge din afskrækkelse på atomkapacitet alene, atomar kapacitet alene. Og det skyldes dels USA's evne til at eventuelt skyde de her missiler ned, men også, at du stadigvæk skal være i stand til at håndhæve din suverænitet, for eksempel til havs, i forhold til Sydkorea. Og du skal også stadigvæk være i stand til at matche Sydkorea i forhold til DMZ'en osv. Så jeg tror, det er marginalt, hvad man vil spare økonomisk, hvis man fra Nordkoreas side får et fuldt udbygget atomprogram. Men jeg er fuldstændig enig med dig, der er potentiale for at gøre det. Men jeg tror ikke, man vil udnytte det, fordi at du vil ikke få noget ud af det, uden at du vil få nogle penge. Og det kan selvfølgelig også være der som deltager i sig selv, men det kommer til at koste på andre områder i mit perspektiv. Er du enig, eller hvad tænker du?
Jeg har ikke vært enig før, men jeg synes at det du sier høres overbevisende. Jeg har tenkt meg at nordkoreanske lederne tenkte nettopp sånn.
Ja.
Men det nå høres det umulig ut hvis du må gjøre alt det med atomprogrammet ditt før det får noen viktig avskrekningseffekt.
Ja.
Da kommer de jo ikke til å klare det.
Altså, hvis jeg var amerikaner nu, ville jeg ikke blive afskrækket af atomprogrammet. Jeg vil blive afskrækket af Kina, som vi alle sammen har sagt. Fordi det er de store dyr i åbenbaring. 3 atomvåben i Nordkorea, som virker, kan sandsynligvis neutraliseres. Og amerikanerne forsøger jo i denne lukkede kreds, kunne jeg forestille mig, at finde ud af, hvor præcis de atomsprængkoder, der er nu. Og i tilfælde af en krig, så er det første, man går efter, det er at ødelægge alt, hvad man kan i det område. Og man har jo nogle enormt store bomber i USA, de her Moab-bomber, som det hedder Daisy Cutter, så bare ødelægger alt. Ikke? Altså, de brugte i Afghanistan. De har også de her bomber, der går under jorden, eller bomber, der går under jorden, og bunkerbusters osv. Og man forsøger at neutralisere det 100%. Eller, tager lige hurtigt militæroperationsmanøvre, at besætte området. Hvis man ved, at atomvåbne er lagret i et bestemt område, så kunne det godt tænkes, at amerikanerne vil sige, det område der er ustabilt i Nordkorea nu sætter vi os på det begrænsede område, og vi meddeler til kineserne, vi har tænkt os så sætte på det her område her. Vi er ikke for at gå i krig med jer, men det er for at sikre ikke-spredning af de her atomvåben. Og det kunne være en mulighed, en begrænset operation, hvis Nordkorea i forvejen er ved at falde sammen. Det er ikke noget, de vil gøre som uprovokeret, men det er i tilfælde af et kollaps, så kunne man forestille sig det.
Tusen takk skal du ha for denne, både disse beredvillige og overbevisende svarene her til slutt, og for ditt forhold.